Welcome back to Trailmakers and more of Fenrir's Airforce. So today we're going to be taking a look at the Mk.13 M-series of planes available in the tech tree, because they're the main branch of fighters. I refer to them as the standard fighters, because the entire side of that tech tree is made up of this airframe modified in various ways, with various weapons and payloads and various logic systems. So we'll start off over here at the Mk.13 M-10 and work our way through a bunch of them up to the new armored aquatic version, the M28, and of course the one with the best missile right now, the M26, as well as the zero drag one, which I was going to show here, but with the zero drag popping up immediately, it, well, didn't look like anything, so it wouldn't have been a good one to start with here, would it? Anyways, let's move on. So anyone joining my server will be able to claim two planes, one of which I'm not going to feature in this video right now, which is the Copperhead, for VTOLs and blade jets on that side of the tech tree. But on the standard side of the tech tree, you'll be starting off with the Mk.13 M-10 Midnight. Now, it's a relatively basic plane in terms of functionality. There's minimal logic support. It's just a little bit for the thrust vectoring to run at low speeds. You can hear the thrusters clicking on when I pitch up, down, or roll left or right, or when I use the yaw, but it's only the maneuvering thrusters that are moving around that are being turned on. And that's to aid at low speeds. When you're not using your full thrust, you can still get the full maneuvering force out of it. Speaking of maneuvering, let's get into the air, so this video will actually be, well, interesting to watch. You can see the handling and response time is actually quite good. It's not some junky plane to begin the tech tree that you're going to have to suffer through with. It's simple, robust, and easily modified. So it's just a good starting point for that, because for Fenrir's Airforce, you are also allowed to modify the stock vehicles so long as it still falls within the limitations of the server. But as you might have noticed, it holds its angles very well when you let off the controls. So I'll let off the stick again. And let's get into sticky mode is a little better. You can see that we're not really pitching up or down in any significant manner. We've got the ever so slightest pitch up, maybe 1 degree every handful of seconds. But you can really let off the controls except for the thrust for quite a while and just let it go. No autopilot or automatic stabilization needed. And in terms of weaponry, it's pretty forgiving for newcomers too, because there's no variable firepower or anything difficult to remember. It's just the standard firepower of 6 smart cannons and 2 rockets. And the only other fancy feature that it has is one of the fancy features on all the planes, an air brake. So when you yaw in one direction or the other, and of course, it yaws in one direction or the other, but when you yaw in both directions, what would normally make the tail return to a neutral position instead spreads it open to create more drag and slow you down. It also causes a bit of a dramatic pitching up effect, but if you're flying at lower than normal speeds, that pitching up effect is probably useful for you anyways. But that's probably enough about the standard plane, except for the fact that because these are the Kitten Jets, Mk.13s, and Mark everything, every plane in Fenrir's Airforce meows. Now some of them do other features while using the meow button as well, but every single one of them has the capability of making that sound because I like that silly sound, and I like cats. So yeah, moving on. So the next version that we're going to take a look at is the Mk.13 M-13, which has limited fuel and ammo logic, but I also figured I would take this opportunity to open it up in build mode for you to show off a couple of little features. One of which that stands out the most is probably the piston glitch. Most of the planes in my Airforce are piston glitched in some manner or another, allowing for extra thrusters, which you can see poking through here, extra armor capabilities. This one has a layer of armor that gets hidden beneath these decorative blocks on top, and extra wings for extra lift without having to have your wings outstretched too much. And it also helps protect them a little bit because they have to fire twice as many bullets onto the same spot to get through them, usually. Sometimes they get lucky and get all the way through one wing panel without damaging the other, but that's just Trailmakers randomness sometimes, I suppose. But anyways, let's pop this out of build mode and take a quick look in this orbit. I'll take a zoom in and post, I'm sure. You can see we've got 3 indicators. We've got 12 rockets, 50 seconds worth of machine gun ammo, and 100% of fuel, which in this model I believe is set to about 8 minutes or so, 500 seconds, whatever that works out to. But that's only at full throttle. It uses less fuel when you're using the trigger lighter, so when you're using less thrust, it acts accordingly. You do have to be a little careful with the guns, because it will continue to run out the ammunition even when it's in the reload phase of the smart cannons. So consider that an overheat mechanic or something like that. It's not actually intentional, it's just the simplicity of the system, but you can have fun with it. And of course, the rockets go down by a whole number every time they're fired. And again, you have to be a little careful not to press it too early, because it will run out a rocket and represent a misfire if you try to fire it before your thing. But also, I'll use that to get our reload alarm, or low ammo alarm, I should say. So once you're down to 2 rockets, or I believe 10 seconds worth of gunfire, or 10% fuel, or something along those lines, various speeds of beeping will occur. And in order to reload the jet, all you have to do is land on semi-flat ground. Well, the rockets reload the fastest, so the alarm immediately turned off, which is good because that was a terrible landing. But there's a distance sensor on the belly. I'm not getting a good viewpoint of it, unfortunately. Well, I suppose I can just bring it up in build mode again now that we've flown it a little bit. Yeah, the distance sensor on the belly, whenever that triggers, starts reloading all 3 systems, the rockets, the ammunition, and the fuel. The fuel takes the longest to reload, but it also takes the longest to run out unless you're like really engaged in combat or something like that, I suppose. But anyways, I think it's about time to move on, because I could babble a little bit more about this, but there's a bunch of planes to get through, and I don't want this video to be too long. It's supposed to just be an introduction and overview. Next up, in Tier 3, I'm going to show off the melee option. The first melee option anyways, which is a quick and dirty version, by which I mean the aerodynamics are taken care of in, well, if I turn off these swords. Off by default. Yeah, you'll see that it's just a couple of glass-colored, good aerodynamic pieces in front of various blades. And the upgraded version does a bit of zero drag instead, because, well, the zero drag is good for actually closing the gap for these melee planes, of course. And, yeah, let's turn these back on. Oh, still getting used to the new controls. They keep switching on us. Bing. So the goal of any of the melee jets is not to ram the people directly, but to slice through them or nip them with the front end. Because my blade jets anyways, typically have them outstretched from the wings, a couple protecting the sides of the cockpit, and then some outstretched out the front. So it is exceedingly dangerous anyways to try to ram through people, because even if you destroy most of their build, even a small chunk ramming into the back of your tail can rip it right off and kill you too. So precision is everything with these, which is why the the M18 here is pretty nice, being on this airframe. It is the quick and dirty version, so I didn't rebalance it. It loses probably at least a degree per second of elevation. You can see it dropping down there when I'm move my hand off the controls. So it's not as naturally precise as the standard version, but it'll get the job done for you. And it does lose the rockets in this adaptation, however. L2 is now turning on the blades off and on. You have your full firepower, however, though if you're using the melee jet, I'm not going to say you're required to use the melee first or anything, but why would you want to use the melee jet just to use the gunfire when you've already unlocked the version that has the same gunfire and rockets, right? That's why there's options. But speaking of options, let's move on, because I mentioned zero drag, didn't I? Hopefully I don't throw off the pace of the video, but I had to record this after the rest of the clips because I completely forgot about looking at the Mk.13 M-28, the new upgraded aquatic version. Now the not standard, but the early aquatic version has no armor whatsoever, and only has torpedoes. But in this version, I added armor, of course. You can see we've got a fair amount of the 2x1 shield panels, as well as some 2x2s, where connection points and weld groups needed, because the weld groups were a little feisty on this project. But we also added in the rockets again, so that when you're above water, your firepower is a little bit stronger. I realized that it takes no logic whatsoever to make the underwater torpedoes only work underwater and the rocket launchers work above water on the same button. So unless you're really, really perfectly at the water's surface, you shouldn't be able to fire both of them at once and either, you know, shoot the water and blow your nose off with the torpedoes, or shoot the air with, you know what I mean. The right thing will fire at the right time, just naturally. But yeah, I'll go ahead and give this a little bit of fly and swim. And I suppose the cockpit's actually a little bit more protected on this one than some other planes, just due to the nature of how it's piston glitched in and covered up. But I don't believe I made it any faster underwater. I saw 46 for a moment there, I believe, so not really any faster. Maybe a slightest bit so, because I think I improved the drag a little bit around some of these underwater propellers, but the speed and physical performance is comparable to the earlier version. Probably a little bit more sluggish even so in air, which says something, because the original amphibious version is also pretty sluggish in the air, just due to the extra armor weight. Also due to the extra armor weight and lack of apparent recalibration on my behalf, it noses down really quite dramatically for one of the 13 M-series. It's losing a good handful of degrees per second and dropping. But that's okay, because this one's allowed to go in the water with no sweat whatsoever. So you don't necessarily need that altitude. You might just need a bath. I'm always looking on the bright side, aren't I? Anyways, now in Tier 3 there's a partially zero dragged option, which if you know what you're doing, you'll be able to modify relatively easily to your whims, though you will have, well, not have to use the stock model to advance, but you're encouraged to use the stock model to advance to Tier 5 from this point onwards. But either way, it's the viable options. I'll probably put it on screen at some point or another, but you can earn up to Tier 3s with any builds, whether it's built by me, built by you, or a build that was originally mine and modified. You can earn up to Tier 5s with any of the customized Kitten Jets, whether they're stock or not, but they have to be I would say like 50% the original plane. They have to be recognizable as the original model to qualify for unlocking Tier 5s and up, or up to Tier 5s, I mean. And Tier 6s and up, which there's only a couple of right now, will require using stock models. But there's only a couple of those, and it'll take a little bit of a while to get there. But I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? So most of my servers are going to have a limit on the detachable blocks, and typically that'll be 1 or 2. So the zero drag on this one uses only 2 detachable blocks, which heats up a little bit more complexity, interconnecting all the sections required, but not too much, and it is more lag efficient on spawn-in. If everything breaks off in just a couple of weld groups, it causes much less lag than if you had it separated out into a bajillion weld groups. But anyways, well, I don't know why I turned towards the rock. That was kind of idiotic of me. But the Mk.13 M-12 Twilight here has a maximum speed of, I don't recall offhand, but we just went supersonic. We're passing 1100. And I'm going to turn around before we hit the wall and go back the other way, which should allow us to get to our maximum speed a little bit more reliably. Now there is a little bit of logic in this version that the partial zero drag doesn't have. It has the simplest form of maneuverability controls. So when I clicked on that red light, it limited my control surface. It limited my control surface angles by about 50%, and now we're going 1360 as we hit the wall. What was I saying? Right. I've completely forgotten. Hold please. Ah yes, the maneuverability modes. So normally, if I go here, our control surfaces and thrust vectoring angles are about 45 degrees for everything except for the rudders. Those are a little bit different. But if you click on the maneuverability mode, then pitch and roll, at least, I think yaw is unaffected in this version because it's just very simple and early. Pitch and roll, at least, are then limited by 50% of their maximum angle, which helps you preserve speed with your zero drag by making the turns not so sharp, and just generally keep some of the wobble out of your flight because it's less twitchy. Because this airframe was never really designed to go over 500 miles per hour. Once you do, you should really click on the handling mode if you want to preserve your speed and not spin yourself out too easily. However, let's click that off. If you really want, you can pretty much, if I'm going to hit this, I'm going to hit the air brake at the same time, and that would turn a pilot into absolute pudding, I'm sure, to pull a 360 instantaneously out of, I think I was going supersonic there, but if not, I was pretty close. But it's Trailmakers, we don't have to worry about G-forces here. Anyways, let's move on to the next tier, or at least talk about one of the other ones in this current tier. Let me check the tech tree. Now, I refer to this as a prototype missile, but I actually developed it specifically to be a pretend prototype missile. It's purposefully a little good in some ways and a little janky in others, but it's effective enough to work and simple enough to learn from if you want to modify your own rather than continuing on to earn the later models. And let's see, the autopilot I think is still the old version, so that's no different. But it is equipped with an autopilot system to fly the plane while you're flying the missile, because it's manually guided RC. So, I'm going to get into flight, and first I'll test out the autopilot so I can see what version it is. Okay, yeah, either I was tired when I was working on this, or I purposely made the autopilot a little janky. Do we have an okay, we have an altimeter. We're only gaining a little bit of altitude. But while the missile's equipped, it seems that it's holding its bank angle weirdly. That's not the natural way of holding a turning circle, is it? But whatever. Anyways, for this version, you definitely have to cancel the current turning circle before initiating another autopilot, and since the missile launch automatically turns on an autopilot, let's get back into normal flight. We'll launch the missile, and you can see it is thrust vectoring, but just through kind of a bend effect, which isn't too bad. It's simple, effective, it works. But the missile, its actual performance is quite a bit more sluggish. It can catch up to the launch plane, if I'm not mistaken, but it has a lot more trouble doing so than the later missiles. And, oh, apparently I didn't limit the angle of the camera on this one, so I could look at it from the side, but normally the camera is fixed in place from behind the missile. It just makes more sense for controllability's sake. I'm also notoriously bad at flying and speaking at the same time, so I don't think I'm ever going to be able to catch up to the plane while speaking here. So I'm either going to skip ahead or fast forward. Let's lock it in, folks. Perhaps it cannot quite catch up to its launch vehicle. But either way, it'll be able to catch up to other vehicles and hit ground targets with pretty good effectiveness. It does have a very small dynamite payload, but you're allowed to modify that at your whim. But the main thing, I'm just going to blow this up, and actually I didn't even need to blow that up, I was just planning on respawning. The main thing is modifying this vehicle is going to teach you a little bit about the troubles with the weld groups that begin to crop up as these planes get more complex. They're visually simplistic in terms of in detailing and realism, but functionality, they begin to push the limits here and there. For instance, I think if I put shield panels right here on the wings, no, it still works. I wonder why I'm missing those. Normally I'm only missing armor on a 20 or up. It's only going to be missing armor if it affects the weld groups. So perhaps the weld groups changed since the last time I did that, but I know the belly is pretty a little iffy on the armoring. So like if I move this shield back one, oh no, it still works. Goodness. This is really messing up my demonstration. I know if you move the missile though. The missile really doesn't like to be moved. But you'll find these things out if you tinker around with your own. Apparently it's not as bad as I thought, but it is a missile that if you want to be effective in combat, you're probably going to have to modify it, or struggle through it to earn the next ones. Because you don't necessarily have to get a certain number of kills or anything like that, you just have to put in good effort and impress me with the builds. It's a little loosey-goosey. But let's move on to one of the better missiles, so that I can actually show a little bit better performance. So first I'll show the 24B with the Mark III Lancers, which are hydro missiles, which is just a fancy way of saying they got underwater propellers glued to the sides of them, more or less. A little bit of drag control. But because there's no cockpit that you get kicked out of or any of the things to worry about, making a missile an amphibious missile is actually pretty easy. It just tends to slow down their top speed and handling because of the extra weight and drag. So the later missiles, which aren't hydro missiles, are going to be faster and more agile than this one. But if you've got mixed targets, this is the choice to go for. So the autopilot works the same, except it's not going to be quite as janky because it's actually, I'm quite sure that this one's dialed in for its particular payload. Yeah. I've already forgotten whether it looked correct without the payload on the last version, but I know with the payload it was banking in a weird way. This one, it's banking in the correct orientation. And most likely it's holding the altitude better too, but we'll see that if we get back in the cockpit without blowing ourselves up. That being said, despite the fact that I'm talking, I'm actually doing alright flying it this time. But I'll let the plane live while I demonstrate the hydrodynamic capabilities of it. Dive down into the water here. It's obviously significantly slower under the water. It's slow even by custom torpedo standards because it's primarily an air vehicle. The aquatic stuff is good for catching slower submarines, but mainly just like if someone's flying close to the water trying to avoid your missile can go, haha, no, I swim. But yeah. I'm going to save time and go ahead and detonate this early and check out the autopilot. Alright, we're climbing approximately 1 meter per second, which isn't bad. It's a lot more dialed in than the other one was. Because changes to the payload, even once it's released, do have like a mild effect on the builds. I recall seeing a video where someone made like very heavy Thor's hammers that use detachable blocks and a lot of weight, because apparently even if you detach it, it leaves some parts of the physics calculations behind. I'm unsure about it. I've never tested that myself. But I do believe we're ready to move on. Now the Mk.13 M-26 here has the Mark V Lancers, which, like I mentioned, are no longer hydro missiles. They've got to stay in the air, but they're shorter and faster, more agile, and yeah, let's get in the air. And this time I plan on actually taking out my own launch vehicle, so let's hope I do something impressive and don't have to, like, you know, wind time forward while I blunder. But as we're rising, you can see that we have very little pitch up and down still, even with the payload on, and that's thanks to just a certain amount of thrusters being active on the missile while you're in normal flight. And a good way to launch the missile is always to be pulling up a little bit, but you can be turning or even upside down and the autopilot will still rapidly correct itself. The only thing you have to worry about is getting tangled in the landing gear of the plane as it makes its turn and you make your launch. But as you can see, this one catches up much faster, to the point where I kind of overshot there. I was going a little too fast, and there's no air brake on this. Oh, that's the other thing. On these, on the Midnights, it's the easier way to call on them, they do still have their yaw active while they're an autopilot missile. So if you're being chased while chasing someone in a missile and they are catching you, you can pull to the left really suddenly and go back. Or, I believe it might not have the yaw fully engaged for the right-hand turn, and if not, that means you can make the right-hand turn tighter too. And just try to... Okay, no, I'm not seeing it. I'm wobbling the missile as I'm trying to pay attention to the plane, and I can't see if the plane is wobbling. Anyways, I said I was going to kill this plane with the missile, didn't I? I already made a couple close flybys. Let's get it done. See? It has, I forget exactly, 6 or 8 dynamite in it. So, and it's spread out a little bit in the tail and a little bit in the front of the missile, so it spreads the damage out a little bit easier, and it doesn't guarantee a hit, of course, but it makes higher chances. I'll click off the autopilot. There's no way. I don't have yaw control, so I can't get out of this flat spin, can I? Wait. Get out of the flat spin, We still have one aileron, and we have... no, there's no way. It's so off balance. I really wanted this to survive the hit. That would have been cool. But, no. It's missing far too much of its tail. Control surfaces are definitely the most vulnerable things on this build, but... Oh, what? Do-do-do-do, oh, back into the flat spin. The final struggle. I really thought it was about to recover there. That would have been hilarious. Anyways, there is, well, I showed the up-to-date amphibious one, which is technically the most current version. It's just the highest number of the Mk.13 M-series. But I would say the most powerful of the M-series is the newish M27, which it has a crisp and fresh autopilot, fully rebuilt after the missiles, which is going to be reused for the next round of missiles because it's smoother. But it has the best armor package available on the M-series. And yeah, so the only downside about the armor packages is it slows down the build up to 50 to 60 miles per hour from stock, depending on just how much armor it has on there. However, I never cover up the lifting surfaces or the control surfaces, which makes them more realistically vulnerable, sure, but it's also because it kills the lift factor and such. You just can't do it. There's a little bit of armor over the swing panel here due to the piston glitch, but even this like front triangular corner of it is exposed to the air and to gunfire directly. But yeah, I believe that's all for the M-series. At least the current M-series, I'm constantly going to be adding to them, and I've already got a couple more ideas for upgrades and variations to this, aside from just carrying more upgraded missiles. But we'll see that in the future, won't we? So a final note for the Mk.13 M-series side of the tech tree. If you're able to collect the entire tech tree up to the Mk.13 M-26B with the Mark V Lancer missiles, I'll give you the opportunity to earn the Double Tap Missile Bomber, which is currently equipped with 2 Mark V B Lancers. And it has its own full autopilot system dedicated to launch either missile first, so it'll begin the, I'll just start showing you. When you launch either missile, it'll begin the autopilot turn in that direction, so you have the option of choosing your turn direction, unlike the Midnight, where it'll only turn right when you launch the missile every time. Now the missiles themselves perform identically, although the aerodynamic control fins are on a slightly longer delay to open up, just due to their positioning in between the engines. There was a little bit of issue that I wanted to avoid, and snagging themselves. But yeah, this is an extremely fun plane to use, especially if no one in the server is capable of hunting it down. It's slower bait, it turns in a tighter circle and doesn't go quite as fast, so it is easier for them to catch your launch vehicle. And given that you have, during your first launch, you still have a payloaded bomb, explosive on it, attached to your wing, it is quite dangerous during the first stage. But then, you do not have to disengage the autopilot on this one to fire the next missile or change over. All you have to do is press the next control, which in this case is down on the D-pad, because even though it's the left firing missile, left on the D-pad is the dedicated meow button. Anyways, that's just a little goofy thing aside. With the second one, I'll go for the kill. Now there will be other special challenges to unlock the double tap. It's currently the special prize of the tech tree, being that it's not technically a Kitten Jet, but it's still well within the Airforce regulations, and it's actually built out of one of my oldest airframes that I still use. It was originally called the Kittenov, based off of the Antonov. In hindsight, it's nowhere near big enough to be called something like that, but it was early on. And hold the phone. Let's check the altimeter. Okay, no, we are dropping significantly. It's maintaining the turning circle, but it's no longer capable of maintaining the altitude. The elevator's trashed like that, apparently. But we can disengage. And the other thing about the double tap, I'll repair and ditch one of the missiles real fast, is that if you disengage the autopilot while you still have the other missile attached, regardless of which side it is, it'll automatically help compensate for the weight and drag differences. This version hasn't been recalibrated for the Mark Vs, so it the extra thrust of the Mark V pushes it a little bit in this direction. But if you do slow down your throttle a little bit, it evens out pretty much to straight. But it does a little bit of pitching and rolling to compensate for the weight and drag. And yeah, I believe I've babbled enough. And if you're still watching the video at this point, go ahead and leave a comment, it'll make me happy. If you have any questions about the Airforce, leave a comment as well. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you on PlayStation Multiplayer. Bye-bye now.
PlayStation